The camera fades in on flashing red and blue lights cutting through the night. Neighbors crowd their porches, whispering in disbelief. A woman, once feared, is dragged out of her garage in handcuffs, her eyes burning with hatred as she screams, "You can't do this! I'm the president of the HOA!" But standing in front of her isn't some frightened homeowner. It's me, the chief of police. And this time, the law isn't just knocking on her door, it's tearing her empire down brick by brick. You won't believe the chaos that led to this moment. Fake officers, forged documents, threats, and a neighborhood living in fear. But tonight, justice hits back hard. Before we dive into this unbelievable story of how the HOA tried to arrest me with their fake cops, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the twists in this one. Trust me. It always starts small. A note on the door, a slip of paper that looks official enough to fool most people. Mine came on a Tuesday morning. The sun had barely crept over the rooftops, and I was sipping coffee, enjoying the quiet I bought this house for. That's when I noticed it. A white envelope stuck to my front door with a strip of cheap tape. No postage, no delivery marks, just placed there, like a warning. Across the front, bold red letters screamed, "Notice of violation." Now, I've spent my life reading paperwork. Reports, warrants, court filings. You get a sense for what's real and what's dressed up theater. This smelled like theater. Inside, the letter was printed on thick paper with a logo that looked almost professional. At the top, Rolling Hills Homeowners Association. Never heard of them. The letter accused me of violating community standards. My crime? A lawn chair I had left out by the driveway after grilling the night before. $50 due immediately, or further action would be taken. No signature, just President, RHHOA. I sat at the kitchen table, turning that paper over and over. It didn't make sense. I had researched this neighborhood before I moved in. No HOA. That was one of the selling points. I didn't want committees, fines, or someone policing whether my grass was half an inch too tall. So why was some president claiming authority over me? That's when I noticed the seal at the bottom. Embossed, raised like it came off a government form. Except, it wasn't any seal I recognized. The words around it were vague, generic. Community Standards Council. That's not an agency. That's not even real. I should have thrown it out. A sane man would have laughed, crumpled it up, and moved on. But something about it stuck in my craw. It wasn't just a prank. It was deliberate. Someone wanted me to believe they had power over me. Someone wanted me to obey. And I've spent my whole life dealing with people like that. People who invent authority, who think they can bend others with fear and paper. I've put handcuffs on men with fake badges. I've shut down crews running scams out of rented offices with gold lettering on the glass. But I never expected to find one on my own street. Later that morning, I walked the block. Quiet houses, trimmed hedges, kids' bikes left on porches. Normal. Too normal. I started asking questions. Did anyone else get a letter? At first, people were nervous, glancing around like we were being watched. Then, slowly, the truth came out. Duke across the street had one taped to his garage. A young couple down the block paid 2 fines already. Dues, they called them, just to avoid trouble. Another neighbor said men had shown up late at night, knocking on doors, saying they were compliance officers for the association. No one had the courage to challenge them. That's when I heard the name for the first time, Karen Van Fleet. She was the one signing the letters, the so-called president. Always dressed sharp, always walking with a clipboard, always talking about standards. Most folks didn't question her. They thought maybe she knew something they didn't. After all, who wants to be the one neighbor who fights City Hall, even if it's fake City Hall? I looked at that first letter again, the red ink still glaring under my porch light. It wasn't just a shakedown, it was an attack on principle. If I let this go, if I paid 1 dime, I'd be admitting she had power. And once you give someone like Karen Van Fleet power, they never stop taking. So I made myself a promise right there, standing in my kitchen with that counterfeit notice in my hand. I was going to tear down this fake HOA brick by brick. I wasn't just going to prove it was fraudulent, I was going to make sure she never did this to anyone, ever again, and I knew exactly how to start. I didn't dive in blind. When you've worked investigations as long as I have, you learn the first step is always paper. People leave trails, bank statements, rental agreements, receipts, print orders. Even con artists need supplies. So that night after dinner, I laid out the letter on my desk and studied it under a lamp. The font was sharp but common, something you could download online. The seal, though, that was the key. It wasn't hand-drawn. It was machine-pressed. That meant she had equipment, maybe a custom embossing press, maybe plates, not cheap. Someone had invested in making this scam look real. I started small, city records. I called in a favor at the clerk's office and asked if there were any filings for a Rolling Hills Homeowners Association, nonprofit registration, articles of incorporation, anything. The answer came back clear. Nothing. No HOA, no association, no board. The name didn't exist in any legal capacity. The next morning, I took a walk past Karen's place. She lived 2 streets over, in a house that always looked just a little too polished. Fresh paint, lawn manicured like a golf course, new SUV parked in the driveway. She wasn't hiding. She wanted people to see her as successful, legitimate. And right there on her garage door, in big block letters, HOA President. That wasn't arrogance. That was branding. She was advertising her fake authority like it was a real title. I knocked on a few more doors. Every neighbor I spoke to had the same haunted look. They'd been getting letters for months, some going back almost a year. Fines stacked up, dues demanded, threats written in harsher tones each time. A couple had even seen men in dark jackets, flashing tin badges, calling themselves officers. Those weren't just empty threats. She had muscle. That set me off more than the letters. Pretending to be an HOA president is one thing. Sending people with fake law enforcement credentials? That's a federal crime. That's when it stopped being a neighborhood nuisance and turned into my case. I went back home and pulled up my laptop. Cameras went up the same night, one on my porch, one in the window facing the street. If she or her officers came sniffing around, I'd have them on video. At the same time, I started a file. Dates, names, copies of every letter I could borrow from neighbors. Evidence comes first. Once you've got evidence, the house of cards collapses. Later that week, sure enough, I caught movement. A car pulled up slow around midnight. 2 men stepped out, dressed in black jackets with shiny badges clipped to their belts. They moved like they'd done this before. One came to my porch, stuck another letter on my door, and took a picture with his phone like he was serving a warrant. The other scanned the street, making sure no one watched. But I was watching. From my window, lens zoomed in, I caught every detail. The car, the plates, their faces, and those badges. They weren't even close to regulation. They looked like something you'd order from a novelty site. I didn't open the door. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I let them leave, slow and confident, thinking they'd scared me. As soon as they turned the corner, I copied the footage to a drive and added it to the file. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and said the words out loud. This isn't an HOA problem anymore. This is organized fraud. And the so-called Queen of Rolling Hills had no idea the one man she picked a fight with was the very person trained to bring her empire crashing down. The deeper I went, the dirtier it got. My office at the station started looking like a war room. Maps pinned with red pushpins, timelines scrawled across whiteboards, files stacked knee-high. Every thread I pulled unraveled more of Karen's scheme. It wasn't just me or a handful of unlucky neighbors. She had mailed out fake violation notices to nearly every house in the subdivision. Some were for unauthorized paint colors, others for illegal plantings or driveway cracks. Completely fabricated nonsense. And yet, some people had actually paid. Fear is powerful, and Karen wielded it like a weapon. Bank subpoenas showed deposits into accounts under shell company names. Rolling Hills Management LLC, Neighborhood Services Group, each one tied back to a P.O. box rented under Karen Van Fleet's name. Thousands of dollars had flowed in, bled from hard-working families who just wanted peace and didn't know they were dealing with a fraud. But the part that really boiled my blood? The intimidation. She wasn't satisfied with just letters. She had staged confrontations. Neighbors told me about men banging on their doors at night, claiming to be HOA enforcement officers. They'd flash fake IDs, demand overdue fines, even threaten liens against their homes. One elderly couple admitted they paid $3,000 in cash just to make the harassment stop. That wasn't a scam anymore. That was extortion. So I widened the net. I pulled in Boone, one of my best sergeants, a guy with a head like a boulder and patience like a saint. We worked together for years, and he didn't ask questions when I dropped the file on his desk. He just looked at the photos of the fake officers and said, "Chief, when do we move?" Not yet. Timing mattered. We had to let Karen keep talking, keep acting like she was untouchable. People like her always get sloppy when they think they've won. One night, I drove past her house again. The garage door was half open, and inside I saw a folding table stacked with papers, a laptop glowing on the hood of her SUV. Two men leaned over it, talking low. I slowed down just enough to take it in. She wasn't just running an HOA scam, she was running an office. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about making money off neighbors. This was a performance. Karen didn't want cash alone. She wanted control. She wanted to rule this block like a kingdom, and her fake HOA was her throne. I couldn't help but smile in the dark, because queens fall hardest when they believe their crowns are real. The next morning, I called a quiet meeting in my office. Boone, Danny from Intel, and two trusted detectives sat around the table. I laid it out, the letters, the fake officers, the shell accounts. Faces grew grim. Nobody cracked a joke. "This isn't just a nuisance," I said. "She's running racketeering under the cover of an HOA. She's impersonating law enforcement. She's defrauding the neighborhood. And she's dumb enough to think nobody's watching." Boone leaned forward, arms crossed. "So, what's the play, Chief?" I tapped the folder on the desk. "We build this airtight. No gaps, no cracks. When we move, it's not just to shut her down. It's to make sure she doesn't get back up." That's when I made the decision. We weren't going to scare her off. We weren't going to warn her. We were going to dismantle her empire brick by brick until there was nothing left but the cold bars of a cell. And as much as she thought she was the hunter, she was already standing in my trap. The trap started with silence. No confrontation, no warning shots across the bow. We let Karen think she was untouchable while we quietly documented everything. Boone tailed her driver one evening. The same meathead who tried to flash a badge at me in my own driveway. The guy wasn't subtle. He rolled around in a black SUV with dark tint, acting like he was Secret Service. Boone followed him from Karen's house to a storage facility 2 towns over. That alone was suspicious, but what made it gold was that he didn't just pull up to a unit. He used a key. He had access. We pulled the entry records. Karen Van Fleet's name wasn't on the lease. The unit was rented under yet another shell company, Community Solutions, but the address tied back to her nephew, a guy with priors for check fraud. Classic move. She was hiding evidence off-site, hoping the paper trail would dissolve into her family tree. With a judge's signature, we cracked that unit open. Inside was the jackpot. Printers capable of churning out glossy notices, stacks of blank red paper, embossing seals, rolls of fake violation stickers. But the cherry on top? A lockbox filled with burner phones. Every number matched calls to her officers and to the poor neighbors she was shaking down. When Boone lifted the lid and whistled low, I knew we had her. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was concrete, physical evidence. We photographed everything, logged it, sealed it. Each box was another nail in her coffin. Back in the neighborhood, though, Karen strutted like a queen. She paraded down the block in designer sunglasses, barking orders at her board members. She even had the nerve to slip notices under doors while people were standing in their driveways. The arrogance was breathtaking. One evening, she stopped outside my house again. She didn't see me watching through the blinds. She leaned over to place a bright red envelope on my porch table, her fake HOA letterhead screaming in the porch light. Then she turned on her heel and walked off like she owned the place. I picked up the envelope. This time, it wasn't a fine. It was a threat. "Chief or not," it read, "you don't make the rules here. Pay your dues or we'll handle it our way." That was it. That was her mistake. She wanted to threaten me, the chief of police, with her counterfeit empire. She just gave me all the leverage I needed. I gathered the team again that night. Boone spread out the photos from the storage unit. Danny read transcripts of the burner phone calls we'd traced. Every piece of the puzzle slid into place, forming the picture we'd known was there from the start. She thinks this is a game, Boone muttered. I shook my head. No, she thinks it's a kingdom. But we're going to remind her what happens when you try to build castles out of lies. From that point forward, the plan shifted gears. We weren't just documenting anymore. We were preparing to strike. But Karen wasn't about to go down quietly, and what none of us realized yet was that she had one last card to play, and it was aimed squarely at me. It started on a Saturday morning. The sun was barely up, and I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee when I heard the rumble of tires on asphalt. A black SUV rolled down the street, slow, deliberate, too deliberate. The doors swung open and 4 men stepped out. They wore dark tactical clothing, badges hanging on chains around their necks. They moved with the swagger of authority, the kind that comes from pretending, not earning. One of them shouted, "Chief Anderson, step off the porch. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice." For a split second, I almost laughed. The performance was so bad it belonged on a stage, not a street. But then I noticed the neighbors peeking through blinds, kids frozen on their bikes, mouths open. The fear was real. That's what Karen wanted, to humiliate me publicly, to make people believe her authority was legitimate. I stayed seated, sipping my coffee like they were door-to-door salesmen. "You boys got a warrant?" I asked calmly. The leader, a burly guy with a shaved head and a fake badge glinting in the sun, strutted closer. "We don't need one. You've been warned about non-compliance with the HOA. Time's up." That was the trigger. Boone and Danny were already in position. Boone stepped out from behind his truck across the street, his sidearm drawn and steady. Danny's voice came sharp and clear from behind the SUV. "Drop the props, gentlemen. You're impersonating officers. Real charges, real time." The 4 fakes froze. Their act crumbled instantly. One dropped his hand from his belt. Another stammered something about just doing their job. I finally stood, set my coffee down, and walked to the edge of the porch. "Here's the problem," I said, pulling out my own badge. "This isn't a movie set. This isn't your little clubhouse. This is my street, and I'm the real chief of police." The silence was thick. The leader, his bravado drained away, his eyes darting left and right, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. "Arrest them," I ordered. In seconds, Boone and Danny had them face down on the pavement, wrists cuffed, their fake badges clattering uselessly against the asphalt. Neighbors were streaming out now, phones recording, whispers spreading like wildfire. Karen's officers weren't officers at all. They were frauds, and everyone just saw them fall. I looked straight into the nearest phone camera and raised my badge high. "This is the only badge that matters here. The HOA has no power to arrest anyone. Spread the word. The scam ends tonight." And just like that, the tide turned. The neighborhood, once silent and afraid, erupted with murmurs, cheers, even a few claps. The Queen's soldiers had been stripped of their armor. But Karen wasn't done. I knew she'd be watching, seething, realizing her control was slipping. And when tyrants lose control, they always lash out. The real fight was only beginning. The street was buzzing long after the fake cops were hauled off. Neighbors stood in clusters under the streetlights, whispering about what they'd just witnessed. Phones were out, videos already uploading, texts flying. For years, they'd been living under the iron grip of Karen Van Fleet and her fake HOA empire, too afraid to resist. But tonight, the curtain had been pulled back. They'd seen the strings, and once you see the strings, the puppet show doesn't work anymore. I knew Karen, though. She wouldn't crawl into a corner and give up. She was a woman drunk on power, convinced her empire was unshakable. The fact that I'd cuffed her men in front of the entire neighborhood only meant she'd double down. She'd spin lies, point fingers, claim she'd been targeted by corruption. People like her didn't apologize. They adapted. They lied harder. They screamed louder. They found new ways to intimidate. Boone parked the cruiser at the end of the block, keeping a visible presence while Danny and I retreated to my porch. She unfolded her laptop, the blue glow lighting her face in the dark. "You weren't kidding, Chief," she said. "These guys are amateurs, but they've got connections. Fake IDs, burner phones, even a printer for counterfeit citations. Karen's running a full operation." I rubbed the bridge of my nose. The night air was cool, but my mind was burning. "Then we're treating it like one. I said. This isn't some neighbor dispute. This is organized fraud, racketeering, impersonation. We build it right. We bury her in court. Danny's fingers flew across the keys, pulling up records we'd already started collecting. Bank transfers tied to shell accounts, fraudulent liens placed on homeowners who refused to pay her bogus fines. A pattern of harassment designed to squeeze every dime out of the people who lived here. She was a predator hiding behind the illusion of authority. Boone walked over, shaking his head. "Chief, you know what's coming, right? She's gonna hit back, hard. She'll send letters, threats, maybe even more of those fake cops." I stared down the block where porch lights flickered on, where kids were being ushered inside, where the air felt heavier than it should. "Good," I said. "Let her try. The difference now is everyone's seen her mask slip. Fear doesn't work once the truth is out in the open." But even as I said it, I knew Karen wasn't someone to underestimate. She'd built her throne brick by brick, lie by lie, and she wasn't about to watch it crumble without a war. The next morning, the storm hit. Bright red flyers were plastered on every mailbox, every door. Bold letters screamed, "Chief Anderson under federal investigation, fraudulent officer, dangerous to community." It was laughable in its desperation, but I could see the unease ripple through the neighborhood. Some folks didn't know who to believe anymore. Fear made people stupid. Fear made people compliant. And Karen was counting on that. I gathered the flyers, every last one, and stacked them on my desk at the station. Boone tossed one down in front of me. "She's trying to flip the script, paint you as the villain." I smiled grimly. "Then we give her a stage to hang herself on." That afternoon, Danny and I paid a visit to the storage unit we'd been surveilling. The place was quiet, tucked between rows of rusted roll-up doors, but inside, it wasn't quiet at all. Piles of fake documents were stacked neatly in boxes. Printers hummed in the corner, churning out counterfeit HOA citations. A corkboard on the wall showed maps of the neighborhood, names of residents pinned under categories like compliant and problem. Karen had turned bureaucracy into a weapon. She'd reduced human beings to columns in her twisted ledger of obedience. Danny filmed everything, her voice steady as she narrated for evidence. Boone sifted through a box of files, pulling out a folder thick with paper. He handed it to me, shaking his head. "Chief, this is you. She's been building a case against you. Fake complaints, forged signatures, falsified reports. She was setting you up to be the fall guy all along." I flipped through the papers, my stomach tightening. Karen hadn't just been running a scam. She'd been planning a coup. If her fake cops had managed to grab me that morning, drag me off in cuffs in front of the neighborhood, the narrative would have been locked. The chief of police, arrested for corruption. She'd have owned not just the block, but the story itself. I set the folder down carefully, the weight of it pressing like stone. "She wanted to frame me," I said quietly. "But she made one mistake." Boone raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "She forgot that the law doesn't belong to her," I said, my voice firm. "It belongs to us, and we're about to remind her." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the rows of storage units, I felt the shift. This wasn't about one crooked woman anymore. This was about every neighbor she'd bullied, every dollar she'd stolen, every ounce of peace she'd poisoned. And for the first time, Karen Van Fleet was the one being hunted. The neighborhood woke with a strange kind of energy the next morning. For years, people had walked their dogs with their heads down, cut their lawns quietly, and avoided eye contact on the street. But now, whispers spread across front porches like wildfire. Some were hopeful, others fearful. Everyone knew something big was shifting. Karen Van Fleet's iron grip had cracked, but cracks didn't mean collapse. Not yet. I stood on my porch with my coffee, watching the kids wait for the school bus. Boone leaned against his cruiser across the Salnasada street, sunglasses hiding his eyes, but I knew he was scanning everything. Danny sat on my porch rail with her laptop balanced on her knees, scrolling through the flood of posts, screenshots, and videos being shared in neighborhood groups. Karen's authority was unraveling in real time, but she wasn't about to sit quietly and let it happen. "She's already posted a statement," Danny said, turning the screen toward me. It was a long rant typed in all caps, accusing me of misconduct, accusing Boone of brutality, and accusing Danny of hacking her accounts. She called herself the duly elected president of the Van Fleet Estates HOA and claimed that criminal elements were infiltrating the community police. It was laughable, but the comment section was divided. Some people cheered her on, still terrified of losing their homes. Others mocked her openly. Boone snorted. She's losing control, Chief. When the Queen starts screaming in all caps, the subjects start laughing instead of bowing. Don't underestimate her, I warned. Cornered rats are the most dangerous. By noon, my phone buzzed with calls from City Hall, the mayor's office, even a local news station. Karen had mailed out packets, yes, actual packets, stuffed with her fake citations, doctored arrest warrants, and phony documents with forged seals. She wanted to get ahead of the truth by drowning everyone in her lies. It was her last card: confusion. We couldn't just play defense anymore. We needed to hit her where it hurt. That night, Boone and I drove back to the storage unit. Danny had secured a warrant with the DA's office, citing probable cause from the evidence we'd already pulled. This time, we weren't peeking, we were seizing. Officers rolled up in unmarked vans, gloves on, cameras ready. We cataloged every scrap of paper, every counterfeit seal, every red flyer waiting to be distributed. It was like mantling a factory of fear. I picked up a stack of forged liens, each stamped with fake county clerk signatures. Dozens of names jumped out at me: neighbors who had been forced to sell, families who had packed up overnight and vanished. She hadn't just bullied people into paying her phony fines. She'd stolen homes. She'd uprooted lives. This is racketeering on a scale bigger than we thought, I said, my jaw tight. Danny nodded grimly. With this much paper, she can't wriggle out. We can bury her in evidence. But then Boone held up something that made my stomach drop. A burner phone, its message history still intact. At the top of the screen, a contact named KVF. And the texts told a darker story than I'd imagined. Instructions about surveillance. Notes on families labeled as problem cases. Payment records sent to men who weren't neighbors at all. Muscle hired from outside the block. Karen hadn't just played dictator with paper. She'd weaponized people too. I scrolled through one text thread, my knuckles whitening. If he doesn't pay, send a notice. If he still doesn't pay, send a visit. The recipient had responded with a photo. A front door cracked open, a terrified family huddled inside. I exhaled slowly, forcing my rage down into something colder, sharper. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was intimidation, conspiracy, extortion. This was organized crime under the mask of a suburban homeowners association. And then Danny's voice cut through the silence. Chief, you need to see this. She held up a file folder pulled from the bottom of a box. My name was on the front in bold letters. Inside, page after page of fabricated complaints, false affidavits, even a doctored video file on a thumb drive. She had been building a full-blown case to frame me as a criminal. The plan was obvious now. Get me arrested publicly, use her fake documents to legitimize the arrest, and then claim Paya. We're by default. It would have been a coup, one forged citation at a time. Boone muttered a curse. She wasn't just after control of the neighborhood. She wanted to destroy you personally. I stared at the file, the weight of it settling like iron in my chest. She thought she could rewrite the law with a printer and a few hired thugs, but now the evidence writes the story. We packed the last of the boxes into the van. As the door of the storage unit clanged shut, I looked at Boone and Danny. It's time, I said. We don't just arrest her. We dismantle her empire in front of everyone. She built this neighborhood on fear. We're going to take it back with facts, with witnesses, with truth. Boone cracked his knuckles. So what's the move? I looked down the quiet rows of storage units, the night air heavy with the promise of justice. We raid her meeting, in her own house, in front of her fake board. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of the neighborhood begin to lift. The night of the raid was stitched together with silence, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Every step, every breath, every flicker of light from the patrol cars parked blocks away felt sharpened. Boone was beside me, his frame looming in the dark, calm but coiled like a spring. Danny's voice came through my earpiece, crisp and steady, guiding the chessboard we'd laid out. All units in position, no movement at the back. Side street secure. It's all on you now, Chief. Karen Van Fleet's house sat smug in the middle of the cul-de-sac, its porch light glowing like a beacon of arrogance. For years, that house had been a throne room, a place neighbors entered trembling, exiting with fines, liens, or humiliation. Tonight, it would become something else entirely. I crouched low behind Duke's backyard fence. His television blared inside, exactly as we'd planned, masking any odds of movement. Boone adjusted his grip on the radio, then nodded once at me. Our team was in position at the side entrance to the garage, her so-called boardroom. Through my directional mic, Karen's voice sliced through the night air. This delay is unacceptable. He was supposed to be dealt with. Now my men have vanished, and it makes us look weak. Me look weak. Her voice dripped with venom, but there was a tremor under it. She knew the walls were closing in, even if she didn't know just how tight. I scanned the garage through a small window. Karen at her podium, two board members hunched at a folding table, their faces pale and tight with nerves. "They're going to learn a lesson about loyalty," she snapped. That was my signal. I twisted the knob, shoved the door wide, and my voice thundered into the garage. "Police! Nobody move!" The room froze like a still photograph. Karen's eyes locked on mine, and in an instant, her face flickered through confusion, rage, and then panic. Her kingdom had been breached, and she knew it. Her two board members practically leapt to surrender, hands flying up, eyes wide. But Karen? She was a cornered animal. With a shriek, she kicked over her podium, the crash echoing like a gunshot. She bolted toward the interior door, desperation painted across every frantic movement. "Boone, cut her off!" I barked. He was faster than anyone gave him credit for. His boots thundered across the concrete, his bulk slamming into her path like a wall. Karen clawed and shoved, wiry with adrenaline, but Boone was immovable. He snagged her arm, and she twisted like a trapped snake. "Get your hands off me!" she shrieked. "I'm the president of this HOA. You can't touch me!" I walked toward her slowly, deliberately, pulling the steel cuffs from my belt. "Karen Van Fleet," I said, my voice even, "you are under arrest for extortion, conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, criminal impersonation, and forgery of a government seal." The first cuff clicked shut around her wrist. The sound echoed in the stunned silence. Final and undeniable. Her eyes went wide, then narrow with hate. "You can't do this," she spat. "I'll sue you. I'll have your badge. You'll regret this." The second cuff locked tight. I leaned close, my voice low and steady. "Tell it to the judge." Behind me, the two board members whimpered as my officers pulled them from their chairs and placed them under restraint. Their loyalty had evaporated the moment the door swung open. They weren't co-conspirators anymore. They were witnesses fighting to save themselves. I turned Karen around, facing her little empire in shambles. "This," I said loud enough for the whole garage to hear, "is what happens when you make your own rules. This is what happens when you mock the law. It's over." Her fury boiled in silence as I led her toward the flashing red and blue lights that now painted the street outside. The neighborhood had spilled onto their porches, drawn by the sirens. For the first time, they weren't seeing Karen in power. They were seeing her in chains. Neighbors whispered, some gasped, others smiled faintly, relief softening their faces. Karen, their self-declared queen, had finally fallen. The tyranny was over. As I closed the patrol car door behind her, she leaned close and hissed through the window, "You haven't won. This isn't over." But the truth was written all around us, in the stunned faces of the board, in the bags of evidence stacked neatly in vans, in the flashing lights illuminating her throne room turned crime scene. She had already lost, and tomorrow, the real dismantling of her empire would begin. The booking process was clinical, efficient, almost mundane compared to the chaos of the raid. Karen Van Fleet was fingerprinted, photographed, and cataloged into the system like any other suspect. But she wasn't like any other suspect, not in her mind. Even as the camera flash lit her face for the mugshot, she sneered like she was posing for a campaign poster. She couldn't comprehend that this time, her words carried no weight, her titles meant nothing, and her papers were just forged scraps of ink. In the holding cell, she raged. The walls caught every echo of her voice as she screamed threats at officers, demanded her lawyer, demanded her rights. But for every demand, there was only silence or the steady hum of a pen scratching across paperwork. She was learning, piece by piece, that the world she'd built was made of lies, and lies collapse under the weight of truth. Back in the neighborhood, the air felt lighter. Boone and I stood in the street as our team collected evidence from Karen's garage. Neighbors peeked from porches, their faces cautious at first, then relieved as they realized the nightmare had ended. Children, once told to stay indoors, now played again under the glow of street lamps. Duke strolled over, his old mower forgotten, and gave me a firm nod. "Knew you'd get her," he muttered. The respect in his eyes wasn't for the badge, it was for the man behind it. The evidence was overwhelming. Stacks of counterfeit liens, binders of fraudulent letters, seals pressed onto fake documents, and the burner phones she'd used to coordinate her crew. Every shred of paper was another nail in the coffin of her empire, and in the digital world, it was even worse. Bank accounts tied to shell companies, records of wire transfers, receipts for custom-printed red paper, all of it traced back to her. Within a week, prosecutors filed an indictment so thick it could have been used as a doorstop. Racketeering, extortion, criminal impersonation, fraud, forgery. The list stretched across pages. Her two hired thugs had already cracked under questioning, cutting deals to save their skins. They testified about the fake badges, the intimidation tactics, even the attempted kidnapping. The so-called board members followed suit, turning state's evidence in exchange for leniency. Karen was left isolated, her once loyal soldiers now pointing fingers in open court. The first hearing was a spectacle. The courtroom buzzed as neighbors packed the benches, wanting to see the woman who'd ruled over them finally face justice. Karen entered in shackles, but her chin was high, her eyes scanning the crowd like she was still the queen of her little fiefdom. She tried to speak over the judge, to shout about conspiracies, but the gavel cracked like thunder, silencing her every time. The prosecutor laid it out clean, a campaign of fear, built on forged documents and fake authority, designed to strip homeowners of their money and dignity. Exhibit after exhibit piled up, the red lien notices, the counterfeit seals, the video footage from the night her fake officers stormed my house. Each piece was a dagger to her defense. I sat quietly in the back, my badge hidden under a plain jacket. This wasn't about glory, it was about closure. As I watched her squirm, I thought of my grandfather's words: rules serve people, not the other way around. Karen had twisted that truth into a weapon, but now the system she mocked was turning its full weight onto her. When the judge finally spoke, the room stilled. He didn't mince words. He called her actions a calculated campaign of intimidation and fraud, targeting her own community. He described her fake badges and counterfeit documents as an insult to every public servant who wears the real thing. Then came the sentence: 15 years in federal custody, 3 years supervised release, and a permanent injunction barring her from any HOA, board, or property management role for life. The gavel fell, and with it, the last piece of Karen Van Fleet's empire crumbled. But the story didn't end there. The fallout rippled far beyond our street. Other towns, other neighborhoods began reporting copycat schemes using the same red paper and forged liens. The task force spread its net wider, pulling in more fraudsters who thought they could rule with fear. And in every briefing, every training, we used Karen's case as the cautionary tale. This is what happens when greed disguises itself as authority. For my block, though, the change was immediate. The whisper of fear was gone. Doors were left open. Neighbors chatted freely. The kids laughed louder, their games spilling across yards once patrolled by Karen's imaginary rules. The street had been given back to its people. And as I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee one morning, watching Duke wave from his mower, I realized something. The peace I had wanted when I first moved here wasn't the quiet of submission. It was the quiet you earned, the kind that came after standing up, after fighting back, after choosing justice over fear. Karen Van Fleet was gone. The law had prevailed, and my neighborhood, our neighborhood, was finally free. A month passed, and the street felt reborn. The fear that had hung over every doorstep was gone, replaced by the easy rhythm of neighborhood life. Lawns were mowed without citations taped to the door. Kids raced their bikes down the block without whispered warnings to stay quiet. Porch lights glowed not out of fear but out of welcome. It was as if the whole neighborhood had taken a deep breath and finally exhaled. The court's restitution program worked quickly. Families who had been bled dry by Karen's false liens received checks in the mail, each envelope a piece of justice returning home. Those who had sold their houses under duress got refunds with interest. The names of VI victims were cleared, their credit restored, their dignity returned. A hotline buzzed with calls from other towns, exposing copycat HOAs built on the same red paper scam. Investigations rippled outward, and in the weeks that followed, more arrests came. The rot Karen had started was being cut out at the root. In my own home, the changes were small but meaningful. The last evidence box was gone, the walls bare of anything that reminded me of her empire. On my mantel sat my grandfather's photo, his steady eyes reminding me of the truth he always lived by. Rules serve people, not the other way around. Karen had forgotten that, twisting rules into chains, but now those chains bound her instead. At the station, her counterfeit tin badges were mounted in the training room. New recruits studied them, learning how to spot fakes, how to preserve phone video, how to recognize intimidation tactics before they spread. Her scheme, once meant to enslave, now became a lesson in vigilance. Each cadet who passed through that room carried the reminder: a badge isn't a costume. It's trust, earned through service and sacrifice. And me? I had my quiet back, but it wasn't the silence of fear or isolation. It was the quiet of laughter down the block, the hum of Duke's mower, the smell of barbecue drifting across fences, the murmur of front porch conversations. It was a neighborhood again, not a kingdom under a tyrant's rule. Karen Van Fleet would spend the next 15 years behind bars, her empire dismantled, her name a warning instead of a threat. Maybe she'd never accept that she'd lost. Maybe she'd stew in anger until her last day. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that her reign was over. This was my home. These were my people. And if anyone ever tried to run this block with fear again, they wouldn't be met with fake badges or forged papers. They'd meet the truth. They'd meet the law. The fence lines were clear, the street was whole, and for the first time in years, peace wasn't a dream. It was here. It was real. The story was over, and the neighborhood was free.